a child wandered into the throne room of an immortal king during a banquet of blood nobles, somewhere she had no right to be. But when she reached out and touched the glowing crimson mark on his palm, the ancient blood moon seal that no mortal should recognize, she looked up at the vampire king and said something that froze every breath in the chamber. "Sir, my mom has a mark just like yours." The guards stopped moving. The nobles stopped whispering. And Lucien Voss, the last of his bloodline, or so he believed, stared at the maid's daughter as though she'd just spoken his name in a language the dead had forgotten. What happened next would shatter a kingdom built on secrets. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We want to know. The moon hung pale and crimson above Voss Castle the night everything changed. Mira Hayes was 7 years old, and she had lived her entire life in the shadowed halls of the vampire court, a place where children like her were meant to be invisible. She was the daughter of Evelyn Hayes, a palace maid who worked late into the night polishing silver, arranging flowers, and keeping her head down in a world that didn't notice servants unless they made mistakes. Mira didn't mind being invisible most of the time. It meant she could explore. While her mother scrubbed floors in the guest wing or folded linens in the laundry chambers, Mira wandered through corridors lit by floating candles, past tapestries that showed battles fought before her grandmother was born, beneath archways carved with symbols she didn't understand. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, the Scarlet Crown Chamber, the heart of the castle, the seat of the Blood Moon dynasty, was alive with light and noise. A royal banquet was underway. Mira had been told to stay in the servants' quarters, but curiosity pulled at her like a thread she couldn't help but follow. She slipped through a side passage her mother didn't know she discovered, her small feet silent on the cold stone. The closer she got to the throne room, the louder the sounds became, low voices, the clink of crystal goblets, the rustle of silk and velvet. And then she was there. The great double doors stood half open, golden light spilling out into the corridor. Mira peeked inside, and her breath caught. The Scarlet Crown Chamber was enormous, far bigger than she'd imagined. The ceiling vaulted so high it disappeared into shadow, held up by columns of black marble veined with crimson. Chandeliers hung like frozen stars, dripping with crystal and flame. The walls were lined with stained glass windows depicting ancient kings and queens, their eyes glowing faintly in the candlelight. And at the far end of the room, seated on a throne of iron and obsidian, was Lucien Voss. Mira had seen the vampire king before, always from a distance, always in passing, but never like this. He sat draped in black armor edged in silver, a crown of thorns resting on his pale hair. His face was sharp and cold, carved from centuries of rule and sorrow. But it was his hand that drew Mira's gaze. His palm rested on the arm of the throne, and etched into his skin, glowing faintly, pulsing like a second heartbeat, was a mark. A crimson seal shaped like a crescent moon wrapped around a thorned rose. The Blood Moon seal. Mira had seen that mark before. She didn't think. She just moved. She slipped through the doors, past the guards who were too focused on the nobles to notice a small child in a plain gray dress. She walked across the polished floor, weaving between clusters of courtiers in silk and fur. No one stopped her. No one even looked at her, until she reached the throne. Lucien Voss was mid-conversation with a nobleman when Mira appeared at his side. She reached out, small fingers extending toward the glowing mark on his palm, and touched it. The Blood Moon seal flared. Crimson light exploded across the chamber. The chandeliers flickered. The stained glass windows trembled. Every voice in the room cut off at once. Lucien's head snapped down. His ember-red eyes locked onto the child standing before him, her tiny hand still resting against his. And Mira, unafraid, looked up at the immortal king and said the words that would change everything. "Sir, my mom has a mark just like yours." The silence that followed was suffocating. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A goblet fell and shattered against the marble floor. Guards shifted, hands moving instinctively toward their swords. Courtiers stared, mouths open, eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Because the Blood Moon seal was not something that could be shared. It was not something that could be copied or stolen or passed to mortals. It appeared only on those of the ruling bloodline, the direct descendants of the first king. And the ruling bloodline had been extinct for decades. Or so everyone believed. Lucien rose from his throne slowly, his gaze never leaving Mira. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and dangerous, but there was something else beneath it, something that sounded almost like fear. "Child, what did you say?" Mira blinked up at him, confused by the reaction. She pointed at his hand, then gestured vaguely toward the direction of the servant's wing. "My mom," she repeated, her voice small but clear in the frozen silence. "She has a mark just like that one. On her arm. It glows sometimes when she has bad dreams." The chamber erupted. Nobles shouted over one another. Guards barked orders. Someone screamed for the High Council, but Lucien heard none of it. He stared at Mira as though she were a ghost, as though she had just resurrected something he'd buried centuries ago. And in that moment, deep within the walls of Voss Castle, something ancient stirred. The blood moon seal on Lucien's palm pulsed brighter. Cracks of crimson light began to spread across the marble floor beneath the throne, splintering outward like veins. The castle itself was waking, and Mira Hayes, the maid's daughter, the child no one noticed, stood at the center of it all, her small hand still glowing faintly where she'd touched the king's mark. Lucien's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Bring me Evelyn Hayes, now." Before anyone could move, Lucien descended from his throne in 3 swift strides and dropped to one knee before Mira. His hand closed around her small wrist, not roughly, but with an urgency that made the child's eyes widen. "Don't be afraid," he said, his voice softer than anyone in the chamber had ever heard it. "I need to see." He turned her palm upward, and the entire court leaned forward as one. There, flickering beneath Myra's skin like embers beneath ash, was the faint outline of the blood moon seal. It pulsed in rhythm with Lucien's own mark, the 2 symbols calling to each other across the small space between their hands. A courtier gasped. Another whispered a prayer. Lucien's jaw tightened. His eyes burned brighter, the red in them flaring like coals touched by wind. "Impossible," someone breathed from the crowd. But it wasn't impossible. It was happening. "Bring me Evelyn Hayes," Lucien repeated, his voice cutting through the shocked murmurs. "Now." 2 guards broke from formation and disappeared through a side door. Their boots echoed down the corridor, fading into the labyrinth of the castle's lower levels. In the servants' quarters 3 floors below, Evelyn Hayes was folding bed linens when the door slammed open. She jumped, nearly dropping the sheet in her hands. 2 royal guards stood in the doorway, their expressions grim. "Evelyn Hayes," one of them said, "you're summoned to the Scarlet Crown Chamber." Immediately, her heart dropped into her stomach. What? Why? What happened? Her mind raced to the worst possible conclusion. Is it Mira? Is she hurt? "The king has summoned you," the guard repeated, stepping aside. "Come with us." Evelyn didn't wait for further explanation. She threw the linens onto the nearest chair and hurried after them, her pulse hammering in her ears. Her daughter's name was the only thing looping through her mind. Mira. What did she do? Where is she? The walk to the throne room felt endless. Evelyn's worn shoes slapped against the stone floors as she tried to keep pace with the guards. Her hands trembled. She'd worked in this castle for 7 years and had never once been summoned to the Scarlet Crown Chamber, especially not during a royal banquet. When the great doors opened, the sight that greeted her stole the breath from her lungs. The entire court had fallen silent. Nobles stood frozen in place, goblets halfway to their lips. Guards lined the walls, tense and alert. And at the center of it all, kneeling on the marble floor before the throne, was Mira. Standing over her, hand still holding her daughter's wrist, was King Lucien Voss. "Mira," Evelyn started forward, but the guards caught her arms. "Mom." Myra's face lit up with relief, but Lucien didn't release her. Evelyn's gaze snapped to the king, fear and fury warring in her chest. "Let go of my daughter. Please, whatever she did, I'm sorry, she didn't mean. Look at me." Lucien's voice cut through her panic like a blade. He rose slowly, his eyes locking onto Evelyn's, and something shifted. His expression, cold and composed just a moment before, fractured. His brows drew together. His lips parted as though to speak, but no sound came. He stared at her as if he were seeing a ghost. "Your Majesty?" Evelyn whispered, confused and terrified. Lucian took a step toward her, his hand still glowing faintly with the blood moon seal. He lifted it slowly, almost hesitantly, as though reaching for something fragile. "I know you," he breathed, the words barely audible. Evelyn shook her head. "No, my lord. I'm just a maid. I've served here for 7 years, but we've never." "No." His voice was firmer now, edged with something desperate. "I know you." He extended his glowing palm toward her, and Evelyn's world exploded. Pain ripped through her left arm like fire tearing through parchment. She gasped and staggered backward, clutching her sleeve. Beneath the fabric, something burned. The guards released her in shock as she collapsed to her knees, crying out, "Mom!" Mira screamed, trying to pull free from Lucian's grip, but he held her gently in place. Evelyn tore at her sleeve with shaking hands. The fabric fell away, and there, blazing crimson across her forearm, was the blood moon seal. The courtiers erupted into chaos. "She bears the mark. A servant. How is this possible? The bloodline, it can't be." But Evelyn didn't hear them. She was drowning in pain, in light, in something deeper than memory, trying to claw its way to the surface. The seal on her arm pulsed in perfect sync with Lucian's. The two marks resonated like struck bells, their energy rippling outward in waves. The marble floor beneath them cracked. Crimson light spilled through the fractures, spreading like veins across the chamber. The chandeliers swayed. The stained glass windows trembled, their ancient colors shimmering as though alive. The Scarlet Crown chamber was responding. Evelyn's vision blurred. Her head felt like it was splitting open. Images flashed behind her eyes, fragmented, violent, wrong. Hands grabbing her hair, dragging her backward. Flames consuming a stone fortress. Black smoke choking the sky. A man's voice, cold and commanding. "Erase her. She cannot remember." Lucian's face, younger, desperate, screaming her name. "No." Evelyn gasped, clutching her head. "No, that's not. I don't." "Evelyn." Lucian's voice broke through the storm. He was kneeling beside her now, one hand still holding Mira, the other hovering near Evelyn's shoulder, close, but not quite touching. "What did they do to you?" he whispered, and there was something raw in his voice, something broken. Evelyn looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "I don't understand. I don't. What's happening to me?" The crimson cracks in the floor widened. The chamber groaned like a beast waking from centuries of sleep. Lucian's gaze swept across the room, taking in the panicking nobles, the trembling walls, the surge of ancient magic threatening to tear the hall apart. He rose to his feet, pulling Mira up with him and gesturing for Evelyn to stay down. "Seal the chamber," he commanded, his voice echoing with the weight of absolute authority. The guards moved instantly. Iron rods slid from hidden slots in the walls, slamming across the doors with a deafening clang. Enchanted chains, etched with runes that glowed cold blue, wrapped around the entryways, locking them tight. A low hum filled the air as the castle's defensive magic activated. Shadows thickened along the walls, forming a barrier that cut the Scarlet Crown chamber off from the rest of the world. No one was getting in. No one was getting out. Lucian turned back to Evelyn, his expression hard but his eyes burning with questions that had no answers. "Someone erased your memory," he said quietly. "Someone hid you. And someone tried to make sure I never found you again." Evelyn stared at him, her arms still blazing with the blood moon seal, her mind fracturing under the weight of forgotten truths. "Who am I?" she whispered. Lucian's jaw tightened. He looked at Mira, still glowing faintly, still connected to the magic tearing through the chamber, and then back at Evelyn. "You're the woman they told me was dead." The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. "You're the woman they told me was dead." Evelyn stared at Lucian, her mind reeling. "Dead? I've never." She shook her head violently, clutching her still glowing arm. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a maid. I've worked here since Mira was born. Before that, She stopped. Before that, what? Her thoughts hit a wall, solid, impenetrable, wrong. There was nothing before Voss Castle. No memories of childhood, no recollection of parents or a home, or even how she'd arrived here. Just fog, thick and suffocating. "I don't remember," she whispered, the realization crashing over her like cold water. Lucien's expression darkened. He rose to his full height, his crimson eyes scanning her face, as though searching for something buried beneath her skin. "Your name," he said slowly. "Before you came here, what was it?" "Evelyn Hayes." Before Hayes, Evelyn opened her mouth. I closed it. Her heart began to race. I don't know. Your parents. Where are they? I don't. The village you were born in? The year. Anything. I don't know. Evelyn's voice cracked, panic rising in her throat. She pressed her hands to her temples, trying to force the memories to surface. But there was nothing. Nothing but emptiness and the faint echo of screaming she couldn't place. Lucien stepped back, his jaw tight. He looked at her not with anger, but with something worse. Horror. "It's not possible," he breathed. He turned toward the throne, his hands curling into fists. The blood moon line was extinguished 32 years ago. Every last member was slaughtered in the rebellion of shadows. I saw the bodies. I'd buried them myself. A murmur rippled through the nobles who remained in the sealed chamber. Some exchanged fearful glances. Others clutched protective amulets. Evelyn struggled to her feet, still cradling her glowing arm. "I don't understand any of this. I'm not royalty. I'm just. You bear the seal." Lucien's voice was hard now, edged with something close to desperation. "The blood moon seal does not appear on servants. It does not appear on mortals with no connection to the throne. It appears only on those descended from the first king." He turned back to her, his gaze piercing. "Which means either you're lying, or someone made you forget." Mira had been silent through all of this, her small hand still clasped in Lucien's. But now she tugged at his grip, her voice breaking. "Mom? What's wrong with Mom?" Lucien's expression softened, just slightly. He looked down at the child, then back at Evelyn, and something shifted in his eyes. A decision was made. "Lady Corith," he called out. An older woman in deep violet robes stepped forward from the crowd of nobles. She curtsied low. "Your Majesty, take the child to the eastern sitting room. Keep her safe. Let no one near her." "No." Mira jerked backward, her eyes wide with terror. "No, I'm not leaving my mom." "Mira." Evelyn started forward, but Lucien raised a hand. "She'll be safe," he said firmly. "But I need answers, and I can't get them with her here. Please." Evelyn begged, her voice shaking. "She's just a child. She doesn't understand." "Exactly." Lucien's tone was sharp. "She doesn't understand. And until I know what's happening, I won't risk her being caught in the middle of it." Lady Corith moved toward Mira, her hands outstretched. "Come, little one. We'll get you something warm to drink." "No!" Mira screamed, thrashing against Lucien's grip. Tears streamed down her face. "Mom. Don't let them take me." "Mom." Evelyn's heart shattered. She lunged forward, but two guards stepped between them. "Mira, it's okay." Her voice broke. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'll be right here. I promise. I'm not going anywhere." But Mira kept screaming, kept fighting, even as Lady Corith gently pried her away and carried her toward a side door. Her cries echoed through the chamber long after the door closed behind them. Evelyn collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Lucien stood motionless for a long moment, his back to her. Then he turned and gestured sharply toward a cluster of robed figures standing near the throne. "High Council, with me, now." The council convened at the base of the throne, 5 vampires, ancient and powerful, their faces carved from centuries of rule and intrigue. They spoke in low, urgent voices, but the acoustics of the chamber carried their words to every corner. "The seal cannot lie," said Councillor Vastrin, a gaunt man with silver hair. "If it appears on her flesh, she carries the blood." "But the blood moon line is extinct," hissed Councillor Myrrell, a woman with sharp cheekbones and eyes like frozen amber. "We witnessed their execution ourselves. Every heir, every vessel, every—" "Clearly not everyone," Lucien interrupted coldly. Vastrin shook his head. "It makes no sense. If she survived the rebellion, why would she serve as a maid? Why not claim her birthright?" "Because she doesn't remember it," said a third voice. Councillor Theron, older than the rest, his face lined with age and wisdom. He stepped closer to Lucien, his gaze grave. "Memory erasure. It's the only explanation." The chamber fell silent. Blood magic, Theron continued quietly. Forbidden for centuries, but still possible. If someone wanted to hide her, to bury her identity so deeply even she couldn't find it, they would strip her memories and plant new ones in their place. Lucien's hands clenched at his sides. Who would have the power to do that? Theron met his gaze evenly. Someone close to the throne. Someone who knew the old spells. Someone who wanted the blood moon line erased. Permanently. A cold silence settled over the council. Lucien's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. Valor. High above the scarlet-crowned chamber, hidden in the shadows of a forgotten balcony, two figures crouched in silence. They wore black cloaks that seemed to drink the light, their faces obscured by enchanted masks that reflected nothing. They had been stationed here for weeks, watching, waiting, reporting. And now, they had something to report. The first spy pressed a finger to the rune etched into their collar. A faint pulse of magic rippled outward, carrying a message across miles of mountain and shadow. The girl has awakened the seal. The woman's memories are returning. Lucien knows. The second spy glanced at their companion, then back down at the chaos unfolding below. They watched as Lucien paced before his council, as Evelyn wept on the marble floor, as the crimson cracks in the stone continued to spread. The message was sent, and in a fortress far beyond the Bloodvale Mountains, in a throne room carved from black stone and lit by perpetual night, Prince Valor received it. His lips curled into a cold smile. So, he murmured, his voice like silk over steel. The little maid's brat has found her voice. He rose from his throne, his shadow stretching long across the floor. Then it's time to silence it. Back in the scarlet-crowned chamber, Lucien turned to face Evelyn. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was steady. I don't know who you were, he said quietly, but I'm going to find out. And when I do, I will find the one who stole your life from you. Evelyn looked up at him, tears still streaming down her face, the blood moon seal burning bright on her arm. And then, she whispered. Lucien's eyes blazed crimson. Then I will make them pay. The fortress of Shadowthorn stood where no mortal dared to travel, deep beyond the Bloodvale Mountains, in a valley where the sun had not risen in 300 years. Eternal night clung to the black stone walls like a living thing, thick and suffocating. No stars pierced the sky above. No moon offered its light. Only shadow, cold and absolute. Inside the great hall, torches burned with pale blue flame, casting everything in a sickly, ghostly glow. The throne at the center of the room was carved from obsidian, its surface etched with runes that pulsed faintly with stolen magic. And seated upon it, draped in black and silver, was Prince Valor Voss. He was younger than Lucien, or at least he appeared so. Where Lucien's face was carved with centuries of rule and restraint, Valor's was sharp and cruel, his features too perfect, too cold. His hair was darker than his brother's, black as the void, and his eyes burned with a red so deep it looked almost black. He had been in exile for 32 years, and he had spent every single one of those years waiting. The side door to the hall creaked open. Two figures in black cloaks entered, their movements swift and silent. They knelt before the throne, heads bowed. Speak, Valor said, his voice like frost creeping across glass. The first spy lifted their head. My lord, the maid's daughter, Mira Hayes, appeared in the scarlet-crowned chamber tonight during the royal banquet. Valor's fingers tightened on the armrest of his throne, and she touched the king's blood moon seal. Silence. Then, slowly, Valor leaned forward. She touched it. Yes, my lord. And when she did, the mark awakened on her skin. The entire chamber reacted. The floor cracked. The ancient magic stirred. The second spy continued. Lucien summoned the woman, Evelyn Hayes. When he raised his hand toward her, the seal burned awake on her arm as well. Her memories began to surface. She collapsed. The king has sealed the chamber. He knows something is wrong. Valor sat motionless for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The only sound in the hall was the faint crackle of the blue flames. Then he moved. He rose from the throne in a blur of shadow and fury, his cloak billowing behind him like wings. His fist slammed into the stone pillar beside him, and the entire column shattered, raining dust and fragments across the floor. She was supposed to be dead, he roared, his voice echoing through the hall like thunder. The spies flinched, but didn't move. Valor paced like a caged beast, his hands flexing, claws extending and retracting. I gave the order 32 years ago. Evelyn was to be erased, mind wiped, memories destroyed, left to rot in obscurity. She was never supposed to remember. And the child should never have been born. He whirled toward the spies, his eyes blazing. How far has the awakening progressed? The seal on the child is incomplete, my lord, the first spy said carefully. Faint, unstable. But it responded to Lucien's mark. They resonated together. Valor's jaw tightened. The prophecy. My lord, the prophecy I spent decades burying. His voice dropped to a venomous whisper. A child born of dormant royal blood and mortal humility shall awaken the blood moon throne and break the tyrant's shadow. He laughed, a cold, bitter sound. They think I'm a tyrant. They think the child is their savior. He turned back to his throne, his expression hardening into something calculating. Dangerous. How long until the blood moon ascension? 3 nights, my lord. Valor's lips curled into a cruel smile. Perfect. He descended the steps of his throne and moved toward a long table at the side of the hall. Maps were spread across its surface. Diagrams of Voss Castle, patrol routes, weak points in the outer walls. Red markers indicated strike positions. Lucien thinks he has time, Valor said, his fingers tracing the map. He thinks he can unravel the mystery, restore the woman's memories, and protect the child. He slammed his hand down on the map, directly over the Scarlet Crown chamber. He's wrong. The spies stood, awaiting orders. Gather the Shadow-Forged Legion, Valor commanded. Call in every rogue vampire who owes me a blood debt. Empty the black vaults. I want every cursed blade, every enchanted chain, every weapon we've stockpiled for this moment. My lord, an assault on Voss Castle is exactly what we're going to do. Valor's eyes gleamed. During the Blood Moon Ascension, when the castle's defenses are focused inward on the ritual, when Lucien is at his most vulnerable, we will strike then. He turned to face them fully, his expression murderous. Kill Lucien, burn the court, and bring me the child. The second spy hesitated. My lord, if the child's seal is awakening, she may be. She's a mistake, Valor snarled. A loose thread I should have severed years ago. I will not let her become the weapon Lucien uses to reclaim what I am owed. He moved to a pedestal near the throne where a blackened gauntlet rested, etched with runes that pulsed with dark energy. He lifted it, sliding it onto his hand. The runes flared to life, and the air around him grew colder. I will take the throne, he said quietly, his voice deadly calm now. I will claim the Blood Moon seal as my own, not through birthright, but through conquest. The prophecy doesn't matter. The child doesn't matter. All that matters is power. He clenched his gauntlet fist, and shadows coiled around it like serpents. And I will have it. The spies bowed low. It will be done, my lord. See that it is. Valor's gaze turned distant, calculating. And send word to our allies within the castle, the ones Lucien doesn't know about. Tell them to watch the child. If her seal begins to awaken fully before the ascension. He paused, his smile cold and final. Kill her. The spies vanished into the shadows. Valor stood alone in the hall, staring at the map of Voss Castle, his mind already playing out the battle to come. 32 years, he murmured to the empty room. 32 years I've waited for this moment. He lifted his gaze to the darkness beyond the windows, where the Bloodvale Mountains loomed like the spine of a sleeping dragon. Soon, brother. Soon you'll understand what it means to lose everything. His hand closed into a fist. And when the child is dead and the throne is mine, there will be no prophecy, no blood moon line, no hope. His voice dropped to a whisper, cold as the grave. Only shadow. They placed Evelyn in a chamber on the eastern wing, a room meant for guests of high standing, not servants. The bed was draped in crimson silk. The walls were lined with tapestries depicting moonlit forests and ancient battles. A fire crackled in the hearth, but its warmth couldn't touch the cold spreading through her bones. 2 guards stood outside the door. Not to keep intruders out.
To keep her in.
Evelyn lay on the bed, clutching her left arm where the blood moon seal still burned faintly beneath her skin. The pain had dulled to a persistent throb, but something worse had taken its place. Memories. They came in fragments, jagged, violent, impossible to hold. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw things that couldn't be hers. Things that didn't make sense. A child's laughter echoing through marble halls. A boy with pale hair and ember eyes reaching for her hand. The scent of night-blooming roses. A voice, her voice, saying a name she couldn't quite hear. And then the darker visions. Flames consuming stone walls. Hands dragging her backward. A man's face, cold, cruel, familiar, leaning close and whispering, "Erase her." She cannot remember. Evelyn gasped and sat upright, her heart hammering. Sweat soaked through her nightgown. The room spun. "Stop," she whispered to the empty air. "Please, just stop." But the memories didn't stop. They kept coming, relentless, drowning her. 32 years ago. The Blood Moon Court in its golden age. 2 children running through the hall of crimson glass, their laughter bright and careless. A boy no older than 10, with silver pale hair and eyes that hadn't yet learned how to be cold. And a girl beside him, dark-haired and wild, her dress trailing flower petals as she ran. "Evie, wait," the boy called, breathless. "You're too slow, Lucien," she laughed, spinning around to face him. "I told you I'd win." He caught up to her, grinning despite himself. "That's because you cheated." "Did not. You used the servant's passage. That's not cheating. That's strategy." Lucien shook his head, but he was smiling. They stood together in a shaft of moonlight that fell through the stained glass above, painting them both in shades of crimson and gold. "Promise me something," Evelyn said suddenly, her expression turning serious. "What?" "Promise me we'll always be together. No matter what." Lucien looked at her for a long moment, then held out his hand. "I promise." She took his hand, and for a moment, the blood moon seal, still dormant in both their bloodlines, flickered faintly across their palms. A bond deeper than blood, deeper than memory. Evelyn screamed. The vision shattered like glass, and she was back in the guarded chamber, trembling, tears streaming down her face. "It's not real," she whispered desperately. "It can't be real. I don't know him." "I don't." But the seal on her arm burned, as if in answer. "You do." Outside the door, Mira had been waiting. Lady Corith had tried to keep her in the sitting room with warm milk and soft blankets, but the moment the attendant's back was turned, Mira slipped away. She knew the castle better than most, every hidden corridor, every forgotten stairwell. She reached the guarded chamber and pressed herself into the shadows as the 2 guards shifted their positions. Then she heard it, her mother's scream. Mira didn't think. She darted forward, ducking between the guards before they could react, and threw open the door. "Mom." Evelyn's head snapped up. "Mira, no, you shouldn't be here." But Mira was already climbing onto the bed, throwing her small arms around her mother's neck. "You were screaming. I heard you." The moment Myra's skin touched hers, something shifted. The pain in Evelyn's arm dulled. The chaotic storm of memories quieted. The burning seal dimmed to a soft, steady glow. Evelyn gasped, clutching her daughter close. "Mira?" "I'm here, Mom. I'm here." The guards appeared in the doorway, but Evelyn raised a hand to stop them. "It's all right. Let her stay." They hesitated, then withdrew, closing the door softly. Evelyn held Mira tight, burying her face in her daughter's hair. She could feel the faint pulse of the seal on Myra's palm, still incomplete, still flickering, but alive, connected to hers. "Something's wrong inside me," Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking. "I keep seeing things that can't be real. I keep remembering a life I never lived." Mira pulled back, her wide eyes searching her mother's face. "What kind of things?" Evelyn hesitated. Then, quietly, I think I knew the king. A long time ago. Before you were born. Before I even remember being alive." Myra's small hand found her mother's glowing seal and rested over it gently. "Maybe it's not wrong," she said softly. "Maybe it's just trying to come back." An hour later, there was a knock at the door. The guards opened it, and Lucien stepped inside. He was alone. No crown. No armor. Just a man in a black cloak, looking more weary than Evelyn had ever seen him. Mira tensed, but Evelyn touched her shoulder gently. "It's all right, sweetheart. Go sit by the fire for a moment. Mira obeyed reluctantly, glancing back at Lucien with wary eyes. Lucien closed the door behind him and stood just inside the threshold, as though afraid to come closer. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I remember you," Evelyn finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucien's jaw tightened. "How much?" "Pieces. Fragments." She pressed a hand to her temple. "A boy with your face." A hall of glass. Laughter. And then fire. Pain. Someone is ripping everything away. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Valor. Your brother?" "My brother." The words were bitter. The one who orchestrated the rebellion of shadows. The one who slaughtered the Blood Moon line and tried to take the throne by force. He took a step closer, his voice thick with grief and rage. "And the one who stole you from me." Evelyn's breath caught. "What are you saying?" Lucien met her gaze, and there was something raw and broken in his eyes. "I think you were meant to stand beside me, Evelyn. Not serve under me. Not hide in the shadows as a maid." His voice cracked. "I think you were meant to be queen." The words hung in the air like a confession. Evelyn stared at him, her mind reeling. "That's impossible. I can't." The seal on her arm flared. Crimson light exploded across the room, brighter than before, more violent. Evelyn cried out, clutching her arm as the mark burned like fire beneath her skin. "Mom." Mira scrambled to her feet. Lucien moved without thinking, grabbing Evelyn's shoulders. "Breathe. Look at me. Breathe." But the seal wouldn't stop. It pulsed wildly, uncontrollably, spreading tendrils of light across her skin like veins of molten glass. "It's too much," Evelyn gasped. I can't hold it." Lucien pressed his own glowing hand against hers, seal to seal. The connection snapped into place. And for one blinding moment, they both saw it. The truth buried beneath 32 years of lies. Evelyn had been meant to rule, and someone had tried to erase her from history. The archivist arrived at dawn. He was ancient even by vampire standards, his skin like parchment, his eyes milky white from centuries spent reading texts no mortal hand had ever touched. He wore robes the color of old blood, stitched with silver thread that formed symbols older than the castle itself. His name was Orvin, and he had served 5 generations of Blood Moon rulers. Lucien met him in the Vault of Whispers, a circular chamber deep beneath the Scarlet Crown Hall, where the oldest records were kept. Shelves spiraled upward into shadow, lined with books bound in leather and chains. The air smelled of dust and magic. Evelyn stood beside Lucien, her arms still wrapped in bandages to hide the glowing seal. Mira clung to her mother's side, her small face pale but determined. Orvin descended the spiral stairs slowly, his staff tapping against stone with each step. When he reached the bottom, he bowed, first to Lucien, then, after a moment's hesitation, to Evelyn. "Your Majesty," he said. Then his gaze shifted. "My lady." Evelyn tense. "I'm not." "You bear the seal," Orvin interrupted gently. "That makes you more than what you believe yourself to be." Lucien stepped forward, his voice sharp with urgency. "Orvin, the prophecy of the lost heir. I need to see it." The archivist's milky eyes widened slightly. "My lord, that text has been sealed for decades. After the rebellion, you ordered." "I know what I ordered." Lucien's tone was steel. "And now I'm ordering you to unseal it." Orvin hesitated, then nodded slowly. He turned and moved toward a section of the vault shrouded in shadow. His fingers traced a pattern across the wall, and a hidden panel slid open with a hiss of stale air. Inside was a single book. It was small, bound in black leather, its cover etched with a symbol that made Evelyn's breath catch, the Blood Moon seal, surrounded by thorns. Orvin lifted it carefully, as though it might shatter, and carried it to a stone pedestal at the center of the room. He opened it with reverence. The pages inside were covered in script so old it seemed to shift and writhe in the candlelight. "The prophecy of the lost heir," Orvin said quietly. "Written by the first oracle 3 centuries ago, in the days before the Blood Moon line was fractured." He cleared his throat and began to read. "When shadow claims the throne of blood, and memory drowns beneath the flood, a child shall rise from hidden flame, born of silence, stripped of name. Neither wholly born of night, nor bound by mortal chains of light. Dormant royal blood shall wake, and mortal humility shall break the tyrant's shadow. The blood moon throne shall know her voice, the castle stone shall make its choice, and when the seal burns bright and true, the lost shall rise, the line renew. Silence filled the vault. Mira stared at the book, her small hand glowing faintly where it rested against her mother's arm. Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. A child born of dormant royal blood and mortal humility. Lucien turned to face her, his expression grim. Evelyn, when was Mira born? 7 years ago, in the spring. And before that, where were you? What do you remember? Evelyn shook her head, frustration and fear tangling in her chest. I told you I don't remember. There's nothing before the castle, just fog. Because someone made you forget. Lucien's voice was low and dangerous. Someone erased your memories, planted you in the castle as a servant, and waited. Waited for what? For you to have a child. He looked at Mira, and something shifted in his eyes. Recognition, horror, understanding. A child who would carry both bloodlines. Yours, the last of the blood moon line, and the humility of a mortal upbringing. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. No, that's not. Mira fits the prophecy perfectly. Lucien's gaze was steady, unrelenting. Dormant royal blood. Mortal humility. She was born in secret, raised in obscurity, and now her seal is awakening. He turned to Orvin. Who else knew about this prophecy? The archivist's expression darkened. Your brother, my lord. Prince Valor studied it extensively before the rebellion. He believed it was a threat to his claim. Lucien's jaw tightened, because he knew Evelyn carried the bloodline. He knew if she ever had a child, that child would fulfill the prophecy and undermine his right to the throne. So he tried to erase her. Evelyn breathed, the pieces falling into place. He stripped my memories, hid me among the servants. Hoped I would fade into obscurity. But you didn't. Lucien's voice was soft now, edged with something that sounded almost like awe. You survived. And you gave birth to the one thing Valor feared most. He knelt before Mira, meeting her wide, frightened eyes. You are the lost heir, Mira, the child the prophecy spoke of. And your existence threatens everything Valor has built. The floor beneath them trembled. Mira gasped as the blood moon seal on her palm flared bright. The tremor spread upward through the castle, rippling through stone and mortar. Far above, in the scarlet crown chamber, the ancient runes carved into the throne began to glow. One by one, they flickered to life, crimson light spreading across the obsidian seat like veins of fire. The stained glass windows shimmered. The marble floor cracked further, the fractures spreading like roots. The castle was waking. It recognized her. Back in the vault, Lucien rose to his feet, his expression hardening into something cold and lethal. Orvin, how long until the blood moon ascension? 2 nights, my lord. That's when he'll strike. Lucien's voice was quiet, certain. Valor will attack during the ascension, when the castle's defenses are focused inward. He'll come for Mira. Evelyn pulled her daughter close, her heart racing. Then we run. We take her somewhere he can't find her. There is nowhere. Lucien's gaze was steady. The seal has awakened. The castle has claimed her. Running will only delay the inevitable. Then what do we do? Evelyn's voice cracked. Lucien turned toward the stairs, his cloak billowing behind him. We prepare for war. Within the hour, the castle was transformed. Guards doubled their patrols. Enchanted barriers were raised along every entrance. The armory was opened, weapons distributed to every soldier loyal to the throne. Lucien stood in the war room, surrounded by maps and battle plans, his high council gathered around him. Valor will bring everything he has, he said, his voice cold and commanding. Shadow-forged soldiers, rogue vampires, dark magic. He will not hold back. And neither will we, Counselor Theron said grimly. Lucien's gaze swept across the room, landing on each face in turn. The child is the key. As long as Mira lives, the prophecy stands. As long as the prophecy stands, Valor's claim is worthless. He placed his hand on the map, directly over the Scarlet Crown Chamber. We make our stand here, in the heart of the Blood Moon dynasty. And when Valor comes, his eyes burned crimson. We end this. The storm came at midnight. It wasn't natural. Anyone with eyes could see that. The clouds that gathered above Voss Castle were too dark, too thick, churning like oil poured into water. Lightning cracked across the sky in patterns that formed symbols, and the thunder that followed sounded almost like screaming. The air itself felt wrong, heavy with magic, thick with malice. Lucien stood on the ramparts of the outer wall, his cloak whipping in the unnatural wind. Behind him, his forces assembled in grim silence. Soldiers in crimson armor, mages with staffs that crackled with defensive wards, archers with arrows tipped in blessed silver. But even as he watched his army prepare, Lucien knew the truth. This wasn't going to be enough. My lord! A scout sprinted up the stairs, breathless. Movement beyond the Bloodveil Pass. Hundreds, no, thousands. The ground shook. From the darkness beyond the castle walls, they came. Shadow-forged soldiers, creatures of living darkness bound into armor, their forms shifting and writhing like smoke given shape. They moved in perfect synchronization, a tide of black steel and hollow eyes. Rogue vampires, exiles and criminals, blood-drunk and vicious, their fangs bared and eyes gleaming with hunger for violence. And at their flanks, dark mages, robed figures with hands crackling with crimson lightning and shadow fire, chanting in languages that made the very air scream. At the head of the army, mounted on a horse that seemed carved from midnight itself, rode Prince Valor. He raised one hand, and the storm above responded. Lightning struck the outer gates with devastating force. The iron doors exploded inward. Hold the line, Lucien roared. His forces surged forward, meeting the enemy at the breach. Steel clashed against the shadow. Magic tore through the air. Blood, red and black, spilled across the courtyard stones. Deep inside the castle, in a chamber near the throne room, Evelyn held Mira close. The windows rattled with each explosion. The walls trembled. Somewhere in the distance, something screamed. "Mom, what's happening?" Myra's voice was small, terrified. "I don't know, sweetheart." Evelyn's hands shook as she stroked her daughter's hair. "But we're going to be okay. The king, Lucien, he's going to protect us." The door burst open. Lady Corith stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 guards. Her face was pale. "All non-combatants are being evacuated to the lower vaults. We need to move. Now." Evelyn stood, pulling Mira with her. "Where's Lucien?" "Fighting at the outer wall." "My lady, please. We don't have time. I'm not leaving without knowing Mira is safe." "She will be safe. In the vaults. That's the most protected part of the castle." Lady Corith's voice was urgent. "But we have to go now before." The castle shook violently. The stained glass window at the end of the hall shattered, and a wave of shadow poured through. The guards moved to intercept, but the darkness coiled around them like serpents, lifting them off their feet and slamming them into the walls. They collapsed unconscious. Lady Corith screamed. Evelyn shoved Mira behind her, backing toward the door. "Run. Get to the throne room. Find Lucien." But the shadows were faster. They surged forward, forming a wall between them and escaping. And from the darkness, Valor stepped into view. He was taller than Evelyn remembered from the fractured visions, more imposing, more wrong. His armor was black as the void, etched with runes that pulsed with stolen power. His eyes burned with that terrible red-black light. He looked at Evelyn first, and something like recognition flickered across his face. "Still alive," he murmured, almost impressed. "I underestimated your resilience, it seems." Then his gaze dropped to Mira, and his expression turned cold. But the child. He tilted his head, studying her like an insect under glass. "The child is a mistake that must be erased. Stay away from her." Evelyn's voice was steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. Valor smiled, a cruel, mirthless thing. "You don't even remember me, do you? You don't remember what I took from you." He took a step closer. "Let me remind you." He raised his hand, and the shadows around him surged. Evelyn didn't think. She threw herself in front of Mira, arms spread wide, her body a shield between her daughter and the oncoming darkness. "No." The blood moon seal on her arm exploded with light. It was like a dam breaking. Every memory Valor had tried to bury, every truth he'd tried to erase, came flooding back in a torrent of fire and pain and rage. Evelyn screamed. Images tore through her mind with violent clarity, running through the hall of crimson glass as a child, Lucien's hand in hers. Standing beside him at the blood moon ascension, 16 years old, the seal burning bright on her arm as the court bowed. Valor's face, twisted with jealousy, whispering poison in the shadows. The night of the rebellion, flames consuming the fortress, soldiers dragging her away from Lucien's desperate reach. Valor's cold voice. Erase her. Strip every memory. Make her forget she was ever meant to rule. Years of servitude, scrubbing floors, raising a daughter in secrecy, never knowing she had once worn a crown. The seal on Evelyn's arm blazed so bright it turned the shadows to smoke. She collapsed to her knees, gasping, tears streaming down her face. But her eyes, when she opened them, were no longer the eyes of a frightened servant. They were the eyes of a queen. "I remember," she whispered, her voice shaking with fury. "I remember everything." Valor's smile faltered. Evelyn rose slowly, the blood moon seal spreading across her arm in intricate patterns, glowing like molten glass. Power radiated from her in waves, not trained, not controlled, but raw and ancient and furious. "You stole my life," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You stole my memories. You tried to erase me from history." She stepped forward, and the air around her crackled. "But I am Evelyn Voss, daughter of the first blood moon line, and you will not touch my daughter." Valor's expression darkened. "You're too late. You're untrained, unstable, broken. You can't stop me."
"No."
Lucien's voice echoed from the doorway. He stepped into the hall, blood streaking his armor, his sword still drawn. His eyes blazed with ancient fury. "But we can." The scarlet crown chamber trembled. Far below, in the throne room, the ancient runes carved into the obsidian seat flared to life, brighter than they'd burned in decades. The castle recognized its queen, and it was ready to fight. Valor moved like lightning. One moment he stood across the hall, shadows coiling around him. The next, he was a blur of black steel and fury, lunging directly for Mira. "No!" Evelyn screamed, but she was too far. Lucien was too far. There was no time. And then the world stopped. Not literally, but close enough. Time seemed to stretch and slow, the air thickening like honey. Valor's charge slowed to a crawl, his clawed hand reaching for the child. And Mira, small, terrified, glowing, raised her hand. The blood moon seal on her palm exploded with light. The castle responded. The crimson carpet beneath Valor's feet rippled like water, then twisted. Thorned vines erupted from the fabric, wrapping around his legs with brutal force. He snarled, tearing at them, but more surged upward, thicker, faster, alive with ancient magic. The candles lining the walls flickered, then blazed. Their flames spiraled outward, forming barriers of fire that circled Mira like protective serpents. The heat was intense but controlled, burning only what threatened her. And in the scarlet crown chamber far below, the blood moon crest carved into the throne ignited. Crimson light poured from the obsidian seat, flooding through the castle's veins, through the walls, the floors, the very stones themselves. The runes etched into every archway and column flared to life, pulsing in rhythm with Myra's heartbeat. The castle recognized her. The castle obeyed her. Valor tore free from the vines with a roar of rage, shadows exploding outward. "You think a child can stop me?" "No," Lucien said, stepping between Valor and Mira. His sword was drawn, his eyes burning like embers. "But I can." Valor's gaze snapped to his brother, and his lips curled into a vicious smile. "Finally. I was beginning to think you'd let the women do all the fighting. You made a mistake coming here, Valor." "The only mistake I made," Valor hissed, "was letting you live." And then they clashed. It was brutal. Centuries of rivalry, centuries of hatred, unleashed in a storm of steel and fury. Lucien's blade sang through the air, met by Valor's claws, blackened and elongated, dripping with shadow poison. They moved faster than mortal eyes could follow, tearing through the hall with devastating force. Lucien drove his sword toward Valor's heart. Valor twisted, the blade grazing his armor, and lashed out with his claws. They raked across Lucien's shoulder, drawing blood. Lucien didn't flinch. He spun, driving his elbow into Vaylor's jaw, then followed with a brutal kick that sent his brother crashing into the wall. The stone cracked. Vaylor pushed off, launching himself back into the fray. "You've gotten slow, brother. And you've gotten reckless." Their weapons locked, faces inches apart. "You think you've won?" Vaylor snarled. "You think finding some servant girl and her bastard child changes anything?" "She's not a servant," Lucien growled. "And that child is more of an heir than you ever were." Vaylor's eyes blazed. "Then I'll kill her. And you. And anyone else who stands in my way." He shoved Lucien back and unleashed a torrent of shadow magic, dark tendrils that lashed out like whips, aiming for Lucien's throat. Lucien raised his hand, and the blood moon seal on his palm flared. The shadows recoiled, burning away like mist before the sun. But Vaylor was relentless. He pressed forward, claws and shadow and fury, driving Lucien back step by step. Across the hall, Evelyn clutched her head, her vision still swimming with recovered memories. But one memory, one truth, burned brighter than all the others. She turned to Lucien, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Lucien." He dodged a strike from Vaylor and glanced toward her. Evelyn's eyes were streaming with tears, but her voice was steady. "She is yours." Lucien froze. "What?" "Mira." Evelyn's voice broke. "She's not just mine. She's ours." The words hit him like a physical blow. Evelyn pressed a hand to her chest, the memories flooding back with painful clarity. "That night before the rebellion, and then Vaylor took me. He erased my memories before I even knew I was pregnant. Before I could tell you." Lucien stared at her, his expression shifting from shock to something raw and devastating. He looked at Mira, at the glowing seal on her palm, at the power radiating from her small frame, at the way the castle itself bowed to her presence. "She is yours." His daughter. The heir he thought he'd never have. The bloodline he thought had ended with him. Something broke inside Lucien, not in despair, in fury. He turned back to Vaylor, and his eyes burned brighter than they ever had before. "You didn't just try to take the throne," Lucien said, his voice deadly calm. "You tried to take my family." Vaylor's smile faltered. Lucien moved, faster than before, stronger. The blood moon seal on his palm blazed with power, not just his own, but connected now to Evelyn's, to Myra's, to the truth that had been stolen from him. He drove Vaylor back with a flurry of strikes, each one more devastating than the last. Vaylor blocked, dodged, countered, but he was losing ground. "You can't win this." Vaylor snarled, desperation creeping into his voice. "I already have." Lucien's blade slashed across Vaylor's chest, tearing through armor and flesh. Vaylor screamed, staggering backward. Lucien pressed forward, relentless, driving his brother across the hall, past the broken windows, past the scorched walls, toward the doorway that led to the Scarlet Crown Chamber. Vaylor crashed to his knees at the foot of the throne. The ancient seat of the Blood Moon dynasty loomed above him, its runes blazing with crimson light. Lucien stood over him, sword raised. "You wanted the throne," Lucien said coldly. "Here it is." Vaylor looked up, his face twisted with hatred. "This isn't over." "Yes," a small voice said from behind them. "It is." Mira stepped into the Scarlet Crown Chamber. Her small frame seemed impossibly bright in the shadowed hall, the blood moon seal on her palm glowing like a star. She walked forward slowly, her eyes fixed on Vaylor. "You hurt my mom," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "You hurt my father." The word hung in the air. Father. Lucien's chest tightened. Mira raised her tiny glowing hand, and the chamber ignited. Crimson light exploded from the throne, flooding the hall in waves of pure, ancient power. The runes on the walls, the floor, the ceiling, all of them, blazed to life in perfect synchronization. The stained glass windows shattered outward, raining colored light like falling stars. The blood moon seal flared across Lucien's palm, across Evelyn's arm, across the very stones of the castle itself. And at the center of it all stood Mira, small, fragile, and absolutely unstoppable. The castle recognized its heir, and it roared in triumph. The light was blinding. Vaylor raised his arm to shield his eyes, but it was useless. The crimson radiance poured from every surface, from the throne, from the walls, from the very air itself. It burned through shadow, like sunlight through mist. And where it touched him, his carefully constructed illusions began to unravel. The dark armor he wore, forged from stolen magic and blood oaths, cracked and fell away in pieces. The runes etched into his skin, false marks meant to mimic royal authority, flickered and died. The power he'd spent decades gathering, the lies he'd built his claim upon, all of it burned away under the truth of Myra's light. "No," Valor gasped, staggering. "This isn't. I am the rightful." "You are nothing," Lucian said coldly. Outside, in the courtyard, Valor's forces felt the shift. The shadow-forged soldiers dissolved, their forms losing cohesion without their masters will to sustain them. The rogue vampires hesitated, then scattered, fleeing into the night. The dark mage's spells faltered and collapsed. The rebellion crumbled in minutes. Valor fell to his knees, gasping, his body racked with pain as the stolen power tore itself free from his veins. He looked up at Mira, at the small child standing before him with a hand that blazed like a star, and for the first time in decades, he felt fear. "Mercy," he choked out. "Brother, please." "You stole 32 years from her," Lucian said, gesturing to Evelyn. "You tried to murder my daughter. You slaughtered innocents to seize a throne that was never yours." His voice was ice. "There is no mercy for you here." Lucian raised his hand, and the guards who had survived the battle moved forward, binding Valor in chains etched with runes that burned cold and blue, enchantments designed to suppress magic, to cage even the most powerful of vampires. Valor screamed in rage and despair, but the sound was swallowed by the roar of the castle's awakening. Dawn came slowly. The storm clouds broke apart, revealing a sky painted in shades of crimson and gold. The unnatural darkness lifted, and pale morning light spilled across Voss Castle's broken walls. Survivors emerged from the lower vaults, servants, nobles, soldiers, all of them staring in shock at the devastation and the light that still pulsed faintly from the Scarlet Crown chamber. Lucian stood on the steps of the throne room, flanked by his high council. Evelyn stood beside him, no longer dressed as a servant, but in robes of deep crimson edged with silver, the traditional colors of the Blood Moon line. And in front of them, small and glowing, stood Mira. Lucian's voice rang out across the courtyard, amplified by magic so that every soul in the castle could hear. "People of Voss, for 32 years, we believed the Blood Moon line had been extinguished. We believed the royal bloodline ended with me." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the gathered crowd. "We were wrong." A ripple of shock and whispers spread through the assembly. Lucian gestured to Evelyn. "This is Evelyn Voss, daughter of the first Blood Moon line. She was stolen from us, her memories erased, her identity buried beneath lies and dark magic. She is the vessel we thought lost. The queen we were told had perished." Gasps erupted. Nobles stared. Servants who had worked beside Evelyn for years looked at her with wide, disbelieving eyes. Then Lucian's gaze dropped to Mira, and his expression softened, just slightly. "And this," he said quietly, "is Mira Voss, my daughter, the prophesied heir, the child born to resurrect the Blood Moon line." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, one by one, the people began to kneel. Nobles in silk and fur, soldiers in bloodied armor, servants in plain cotton. All of them bowed before the small girl who had walked into a throne room and spoke a simple truth. Lucian looked down at Mira. Her wide eyes were filled with confusion and fear, her small hand clutching her mother's. He knelt. The vampire king, ancient, immortal, untouchable, lowered himself to one knee before his daughter. "I didn't know," he said softly, his voice breaking. "I didn't know you existed. But now that I do..." He reached out, and Mira hesitantly placed her glowing hand in his. The blood moon seals on their palms connected, pulsing in perfect rhythm. "You are my blood," Lucian whispered. "My heir, my future." Tears streamed down Myra's face. "I'm scared." "I know." Lucian's thumb brushed across her knuckles gently. "But you're not alone. You never were." He glanced up at Evelyn, and she knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around them both. For the first time in 32 years, the Blood Moon family was whole. The Scarlet Crown chamber responded. The runes carved into the throne blazed brighter, their light spreading across the obsidian seat like veins of molten gold. The stained glass windows, shattered during the battle, began to reform, fragments lifting from the ground and fitting themselves back together, glowing as they sealed. The marble floor, cracked and broken, smoothed over. The crimson carpets unfurled themselves. The chandeliers reignited, their flames burning steady and bright. The castle was healing. Mira stepped toward the throne, her small feet echoing in the vast chamber. She reached out hesitantly and placed her hand on the armrest. The entire throne ignited. Light poured from it, crimson and gold, ancient and pure. It flooded through the chamber, through the castle, through the very stones of Voss itself. And every soul within those walls felt it. The blood moon line had returned. In the weeks that followed, the kingdom began to rebuild. Valor was tried before the High Council and sentenced to eternal imprisonment in the Vaults of Silence, a place where even vampires could not escape, where time moved differently and madness was the only companion. Evelyn's memories returned fully, bit by bit, and with them came the knowledge of who she had been. A princess, a vessel, a woman meant to stand beside a king. She and Lucien spoke late into the nights, piecing together the past, mourning what had been stolen and carefully, tentatively, building something new. Mira trained with the castle's mages, learning to control the power that had awakened within her. She was young, still fragile, still prone to nightmares. But she was strong, and she was loved. One evening, as the sun set over Voss Castle, Lucien stood on the balcony overlooking the kingdom. Evelyn joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Do you think she'll be ready?" Evelyn asked quietly. When the time comes, Lucien watched as Mira played in the courtyard below, her laughter echoing through the twilight.
"She'll have to be," he said.
"But she won't face it alone." Evelyn leaned against him.
"No.
She won't." Far below, Mira paused, her small hand glowing faintly. She looked up at the balcony, at her parents, and smiled. The blood moon seal pulsed gently on her palm, a reminder of what she was and what she would become. The maid's daughter had spoken a simple truth. "Sir, my mom has a mark just like yours." And in doing so, she resurrected a kingdom. The blood moon line had risen again, and this time it would never fall. The end.